Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Marco's Pizza. We're very busy today. We'll jump right into it in a moment. Jeff Sentell going to be here. We'll talk some UGA recruiting with him on Friday like we always do. We'll begin our show today, though, with some pretty interesting comments from Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, who met with the media there on a Thursday night. Really interesting to hear from the Georgia quarterback, a year older now after being the Dogs freshman starter in 2017, and a lot more mature. You're going to like this. We'll do it next as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You'll remember about a week or so ago, Kirby Smart chastised the media for this thought that Georgia was going to use the Alabama loss in the national championship game as some sort of overarching motivating factor for the 2018 season. Kirby Smart believes that shouldn't really be top of mind and said himself that for him, he's not really thinking about it a whole bunch at all. Here is what Kirby said, if you've forgotten.
So the fact that they're talking to y'all about it is just because you asked. And if you ask our kids, their immediate response is, oh yeah, it's motivation, it's motivation. We don't discuss that because that team is no longer here. I mean, I don't believe in motivating through fear or motivating just through revenge. Now, can revenge be a factor? Yeah. But we don't have Alabama on our schedule next year, not the regular season schedule. We got a lot more to worry about than that.
And in fact, Kirby went so far as to say that when it comes to those sort of motivating factors for a season, that you can't get that from anything outside of you. No external factor, no opponent that you might play in December. All of that kind of stuff has got to come from within. I thought Kirby made an interesting point on this, and I wanted to play it for you one more time. Take a listen.
I would rather have some kind of intrinsic motivation of, I want to be the best player I can be. I want to get to be the best I can be. I don't want it to be because of this, because you may not always have that. You may not always have that ability to generate that motivation. So we don't really talk about it. I mean, we talk about the lessons we learn in coverage, the lessons we learn in keeping the quarterback in the pocket, protecting the ball. We learn lessons from the game, but we're not using the game as a mantra, a battle cry. I just don't think that's what you want to do.
The reason why I start the show by playing that audio from Kirby Smart is because I think in football, what coaches really want is they want their quarterback to sort of be a guy from a sort of maybe emotional, cognitive standpoint that really models the behavior on the field that the coach tries to instill in practice. You want that strong bond, that similar wavelength to be there for a coach and his quarterback. And I think when it comes to Coach Kirby Smart and his starting quarterback, Jake Fromm, I think you have an example of that because Jake Fromm on Thursday met with the media there in Athens just a little bit for a little while, and you really hear from Fromm a very similar tone to what Kirby Smart tried to strike when it comes to Alabama game. Kirby says, I'm not thinking about the game. I don't want the players thinking about that. We're worried about the 2018 season, what we have to do here. And when Jake Fromm was asked, hey, do you think about Alabama? Do you use it as a motivating force? Well, Kirby Smart's, or I should say Jake Fromm's answer is very similar to Kirby Smart's and almost exactly what Smart would hope that it would be from his quarterback. Here is Jake Fromm on that subject.
Not really. I mean, at the end of the day, we come in and we want to compete and we want to, be the best we can be. It starts with ourselves, and then we want to dominate everybody, in the East. So at the end of the day, we're competing with ourselves, and it kind of starts in house, and I'm trying to get better every day.
So, I mean, listen, how much do you love that if you're Kirby Smart, that the tone that he tried to strike with his initial comments, Jake Fromm kind of echoing that same thing. And, the phrase that sticks out there from what Fromm had to say is, we'll worry about Alabama when it gets to be time to worry about Alabama if there is indeed a rematch coming up in December. For right now, though, we want to think about dominating our opponents in the East, or as we say it here on DawgNation Daily, to own the East again for 2018. That's what Jake Fromm's thinking about right now. And I think we would all agree that is the first goal for Georgia this upcoming season. Knock that domino down, and then everything else should start falling behind it rather nicely. By the way, it's kind of interesting with the thought of dominating the East for this upcoming season. Jake Fromm's words there. ESPN certainly gives Georgia a great chance to do that. It recently published its ESPN FPI data. This is all that sort of numeric analytics type stuff, 10,000 simulations, sort of build up the likelihood of winning games here. And in the case of Georgia, they are overwhelmingly overwhelmingly likely to win all their games this season, at least based on the FPI data, and in the SEC East in particular. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I wanted to just sort of drop this in the midst of this Fromm audio here, you may not be aware of this, but when it comes to Georgia's games in the SEC East this season, the one that we all think of as the hardest is not the one that right now ESPN thinks of as the most difficult. We would think that Georgia's toughest game in the SEC East, the toughest opponent for Georgia to dominate, as Jake Fromm mentioned there, might be South Carolina. But according to the ESPN FPI data, that's just the third toughest game for Georgia in the East this season. Believe it or not, toughest division game for Georgia, according to the ESPN numbers, at Missouri, a game in which Georgia's got a 78.3 chance of winning. Second toughest game in the East, Florida, believe it or not, which is sort of a surprise to me. Georgia has a 78.7% chance of winning. And then you get to South Carolina, which gives Georgia a 79.1% chance of winning on the road there in Columbia against the Gamecocks week 2. So when it comes to dominating the SEC East, it sounds like ESPN and its math guys expect that to happen, but maybe the tougher game of that trio, not the one we would all think it is. It's also worth pointing out here that when it comes to ESPN FPI data, it was wrong about Georgia a year ago. It gave Georgia a better chance than not of losing to both Tennessee and Florida, and obviously the Dogs dominated those two opponents by almost a collective 100 points. So ESPN FPI data has been wrong before. We'll see how it plays out when it comes to the SEC East. But as much as Fromm may want to say it, hey, we're trying to dominate the East here in 2018. We're trying to focus in on this upcoming season. He did admit when that Alabama game was over, that sort of next day, there was definitely that stinging feeling about what might have been, and the initial issue of trying to shake all that off. Here's a little bit more from Jake Fromm.
It's going to be tough for anybody, but at the end of the day, you kind of have to, take your licks and move on and, on to the next one. And kind of getting focusing in and dialing in and just trying to focus on and be the best football player we can be here at the University of Georgia, and just take it one day at a time.
We have said this before when it comes to that Alabama loss, that Kirby Smart has a level of plausible deniability when he says we don't want to think about it, and Jake Fromm kind of does too, of I'm not really using that as a motivating force. But it doesn't mean there isn't someone on the Georgia coaching staff. My assumption is it's the strength and conditioning coach Scott Sinclair, who is kind of reminding you of what you had to shake off on that Tuesday early in January, and that sinking feeling of that next day. My guess is that's being used in some form or fashion around Georgia, and my guess is Fromm and his teammates will respond to that when the time comes to maybe get that rematch against the Alabama Crimson Tide. The other big issue for Fromm right now at Georgia is the fact that he's in a position now to be pushed as the Georgia starting quarterback, the way that he was the guy pushing last year's starter in Jacob Eason. The guy who's pushing him is the incoming freshman Justin Fields. He's going through his first spring practice here at Georgia, and Fromm says, yes, he does expect to be challenged and pushed by the very impressive incoming freshman Fields. Here's what Fromm said about Fields on Thursday.
I expect nothing, but Justin to come out and compete. Everybody in that quarterback room is competing and working really hard. And at the end of the day, we're making the team a lot better. And any way we can help the team as a room and as a unit, we're going to do it.
So he says, listen, the competition makes the entire team better. And what I thought about that when I first heard that audio is how much it sounds similar to what Fromm said really about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, when he was in the opposite situation. The other side of the coin, he was the pusher against the incumbent starter a year ago. Now he's the incumbent starter, maybe being pushed, but his tone really hasn't changed. Fromm has apparently been a guy that's always believed that competition was the best thing for Georgia at the quarterback position and every other position as well. Just said that there, and then back in January last year, said essentially the same thing when he was the guy trying to start a competition. Here's a reminder of that.
Competing, it's not only making myself better, it's making him better, it's making, at the end of the day, the team better. And I just want to see Georgia football be successful. And, I just want to go at it, take it one step every single day and help any way I can.
I think it's a credit to Jake Fromm that he's remained so consistent on that idea that competition's good, no matter who has the sort of presumed edge in that competition. It's one of the reasons why Georgia fans like Jake Fromm so much. Before we move on, let me let you hear a couple more from Fromm. As I just talked about, he's in a different position. He's been at Georgia for a year now. He's moving into his second year, going through his second spring as the University of Georgia quarterback and on campus there in Athens. How are things different this go-around than from last year? Well, here's Fromm on that subject.
Definitely now I got a whole lot better of understanding of everything. Kind of have an idea of what's going on and, how to get to classes too on time. So that's definitely good for me. Football's been going pretty well. Just kind of get a better feel of things and kind of know how things are running right here.
he jokes about getting to class on time, but I think there is an element of you do just get more comfortable with campus life. I think a lot of us remember how big college campuses could seem when we first arrived at them. I imagine for football players, it's not that different, really. I imagine he is more comfortable there in Athens this year than he was maybe a year ago. He also references some of the things that he's learned, some of the development that he's had in his time as Georgia quarterback. He went into a little bit more detail about exactly what he has learned from being the quarterback at Georgia here over the last 12 months.
Coming here is you definitely kind of get a football education. You learn a whole lot about football. Definitely being your first year of college, you kind of grow up a lot, and I learned a lot in that aspect. And kind of coming through, what we went through last year, learn a lot about our team, and continue to learn even more now, and kind of see where we're going.
Listen, the bottom line for me on the entire discussion is I can't even pretend to hide my affection for Fromm. I just think he's a really impressive guy. I think he's a really good football player, and I think he's a sharp guy off the field. And what you see from him and what you hear from him in the audio we just heard there is a guy that was impressive a year ago when all this was brand new. Now he's a little more seasoned. Now he sort of comes across a little bit more like a veteran. He was mature a year ago, sort of uncannily mature for a freshman, even more mature now. And that added maturity, that added intelligence, that added football IQ, I just think it bodes really well for Georgia. I love both of Georgia's quarterbacks right now, but when it comes to the incumbent starter Fromm, the sharp, seasoned brand of football I expect him to play, I think he could really show out here in 2018. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Good to have you with us, whether you watch us 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook page, 10 a.m. on the DawgNation YouTube page. We appreciate you checking us out on video, listening to us on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We love being on the radio with our friends there in the Classic City. Of course, in podcast form, Apple Podcasts, Android devices, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just really glad you have found us here today on DawgNation Daily, and hopefully we'll make good use of your time with a really fun show coming up on the program today. We'll hear from Jeff Sentell a little bit later on. As I mentioned, though, DawgNation Daily is presented by Marco's Pizza, and I've been telling you now for a while about this great offer that Marco's has, and what a great weekend to sort of check in on this. I guess there is some thought that here in the state of Georgia could be a little bit rainy tomorrow afternoon, maybe a little early. Don't know what that does to the golf there in Augusta, but if you're going to settle in and watch a little golf, or maybe check in on the Georgia baseball team at Vanderbilt here this weekend, how about you get the great deal from Marco's, because they want you to meet the boss. It's the boss of all cheese pizza. Listen to this now. It's the big cheese pizza from Marco's, made with 5 fresh cheeses. Right now, you can get an extra large for just $10.99. That's $10.99 to get the big cheese from Marco's. We actually all had Marco's pizza for lunch here yesterday. I mean, those boxes came out, and that stuff got scarfed up in like 5 minutes. People love the pizza from Marco's, and I am thrilled to have Marco's as a part of DawgNation Daily here. Really fun to partner with Marco's Pizza. We're going to have a lot of fun with those guys over the course of the months ahead here. As I said, Jeff Sentell coming up in just a couple of moments. Of course, when Jeff's on the show, recruiting always the topic, and when it's time to talk about recruiting for the class of 2018, one of the subjects that Jeff and I kicked around a bunch was Georgia's pursuit of a wide receiver, and really not just any wide receiver. We knew that Georgia was going to meet its need for outside receivers, those big burners on the outside with the class of 2019, but there was that need to maybe replace Isaiah McKenzie and some of the work that he'd done for Georgia, while he was in Athens. And the 2018 class, you need to find that slot receiver, that guy that could play on the inside there and be so tough for defenses to deal with. And one of the names that we obviously looked at was Kearis Jackson, the prospect from Peach County. And when Jackson chose Georgia, it was a happy day for Dog fans. Do you remember when Kearis Jackson said this?
The opportunity is there. They're building up on a great football program with Coach Kearis coming in. 2018 class will be strong. Looking forward to recruiting the class very hard. I'm just ready to be a Bulldog.
That was exciting news when Kearis Jackson sort of dropped that he was ready to come to the University of Georgia. And so far, it sounds like that he's sort of making good on his college opportunity when it comes to his first spring practice at Georgia. And y'all know how we feel around here. We think that spring practice for these guys that have the good fortune of being early enrollees is really a really good way to get ready for college life and get acclimated to the program. We think it gives you a big advantage over trying to play as a freshman over the summer enrollees. Not that summer enrollees can't do it. It's just a little easier to do it when you go through spring practice. And Kirby Smart's had his chance to evaluate Kearis Jackson, the incoming freshman wide receiver, so far this spring. And here is the assessment that Kirby has recently given about what Kearis is doing out there. Take a listen to this.
He's learning how to play in there and outside. He's a very bright kid. It matters to Kearis. He doesn't do it right. It bothers him. He takes coaching well. But I do think he's different than those guys. What he's going to give us is still yet to be determined, because those guys have elite straight line speed and quickness. And Kearis is a good body guy. I mean, he gives you a bigger body, more physical, can block people, and some toughness in there. So he gives you a little something those other guys don't give you.
Let me give you a quick point of clarity here. Kirby references those guys. That goes back to the question that he was asked by Kearis Jackson of how he looks and fits into that slot receiver role in comparison to other guys that sometimes play that position, like a McCole Hardman and an Akil Crumpton. You know the story with Crumpton. Crumpton, you know, from a body type size is overall pretty small, but incredibly fast. And McCole Hardman is also, you know, he's not as small as Crumpton is, but he's more known for his speed than his size. I was looking at some of the numbers online this morning. The official Georgia site on its bio, it lists McCole Hardman right now. I believe if I have the number remembered correctly, 183 pounds is what they list McCole at right now. Whereas if you look at like a website like 24/7 Sports, which covers the recruiting industry, coming out of high school, they already had Kearis listed at 203. I don't know what he's up to now or how the weight's changed since he's been on campus, but just right there, just these two internet numbers give you a sense that Kearis is about 20 pounds heavier than McCole Hardman. As Kirby Smart said, that's a pretty different look there for that slot receiver and potentially an interesting impact player for Georgia coming up this fall. It is really good to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily. We're presented by Marco's Pizza. We got a lot of fun to do. We'll do our Kroger click list checklist later on and check in on the Red Hot Diamond Dogs. For now, though, a little more UGA recruiting talk as we welcome in Jeff Sentell, and it's good to have you with us too.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And it's great to have Jeff Sentell here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And a lot of recruiting stuff I want to get to here, and looking forward to getting Jeff's thoughts on this. And, Jeff, if you don't mind, let me start this way. I kind of got a kick out of Rashad Cheney, the former Georgia commit, chooses Alabama here, and his high school teammate, Jaden Hazelwood, on Instagram had a great response to Cheney's, I guess, Insta post with his Alabama logo and all that kind of stuff. I think if you're watching on video, we might be able to show this to you here. What Hazelwood says in response to Cheney, he says, congrats, my boy. This is what we work so hard for, them early mornings, late nights. But I want to let you know we're still going to smack you on the SEC championship. That's obviously, Jeff, a playful jab between a couple guys who are great friends with each other. But it shows you a couple things here. A, Jaden Hazelwood is really high on Georgia's future. And for anybody who's worried about Hazelwood and a wandering eye and some official visits to other places, I know he's got the Oklahoma visit. It's either just happened or it's coming up. It sounds like Hazelwood's still locked in with the Dogs right there.
Oh, Brandon, man, you nailed it, man. I think that one Instagram message right there tickles all the ivories for you on what you want to hear from your Bulldog recruit. Because you break it down and you got the layers. You got the playful ballyhoo and tomfoolery among boys. You got the congratulations and showing that they are a genuinely well-rounded young person. But you also get the immediate destruction of any wild theory that Rashad Cheney to Alabama will now help lure the five-star receiver to Tuscaloosa and away from Athens. I think that checks all the boxes for you, doesn't it, sir?
Yeah, it absolutely does, and you're right. That sort of squashes that rumor before it starts because, there's obviously a lot of trepidation for Georgia fans right now, just given the fact that, you've got these elite commits right now who are getting a lot of attention from other places, and it obviously feels like a long time to December, but you've reported on this a million times, and you can't say it more emphatically and more clearly than you have, is that there is no tangible evidence whatsoever to suggest that Nolan Smith's going to end up somewhere else. That I know he said what he said in Tuscaloosa not too long ago, but I sort of take that with a grain of salt. Jaden Hazelwood here as well. These guys right now feel about as solid as a commit can feel, this early in the 2019 process.
Well, I would say this, and Georgia fans will have to get used to this. Here you have two of the top 5 players in the country that have been committed to Georgia for both over a year. And it was a year in advance of their class cycle year as the up next, most recent class cycles that we're going to see their most heavy recruiting attention. So this is really rare territory for Georgia, its program, the recruiters on staff, and also just the fan base who likes to maybe worry about 5 stars the way that other people say the words daily during your show or dilly during a certain golf course golf tournament that we can't talk about right now. But it's just par for that course, Brandon. These guys are so highly rated. They committed to Georgia so early. They're going to take their visits. And I guess everybody just likes to worry about those things. But if we collect all the information and we understand the way these young men are talking about their decisions when asked, there's not a lot of panic button statements out there just yet from either one of them.
I don't mind telling you that the sort of origin of all this conversation about Jaden Hazelwood is the fact that Rashad Chaney put out there on social media that he was committing to Alabama. I'll be honest, Jeff, this caught me completely off guard. I was blindsided by this news. Were you surprised that Chaney, the one-time UGA commit, is apparently now going to be a part of the 2019 class for Alabama?
I think it is very interesting. And, you know, a side note on that before we get back on the cart path, Brandon, is, first of all, this is something new for me with recruiting because Rashad Chaney basically put out on his Instagram that he was going to be committing to Alabama, or he was committed to Alabama. He did this a day before, maybe even a full day and a half before he actually made it known on Twitter. So I guess somehow in this recruiting lane we're in, that Instagram can kind of be like the engagement ring and maybe the proposal, and it's not official until Twitter drops its eyes on it and they make it official with an edit or something else like that. So the thing with Chaney, though, that strikes me is it's not, you know, Georgia just had guys that they were pursuing harder than Chaney, and you know it was never written, but it was kind of the innuendo there that the reason Rashad Chaney backed off Georgia is because other schools were recruiting him harder than Georgia.
Yeah.
And that could be interpreted to mean that it was the slow play situation there, or it could be interpreted to mean that there was a lack of communication there. But you should be happy for the young man that he ends up at Alabama. But the part that puzzles me is I think Rashad Chaney's about 6'2" and 270 pounds. Now, he is a four-star player. He's a tenacious player. He's going to be a very good player in the SEC, but when you're talking defensive tackles, that doesn't fit the norm or the profile for the Alabama defensive tackle mold or what Georgia looks for now. If you look at priority targets like Garrett Green, Josh Harris, Travon Walker, Jalen Humphreys, and then you think about those guys that are uncommitted targets at defensive tackle, all those guys are about 6'4" and at least 280 pounds, except for Walker, who goes 6'6", about 270. But you just see a different body type that Georgia's looking for at defensive tackle. And you then look at the other prospects Georgia has at defensive tackle, like Bill Norton, who's going to maybe slide down and play some defensive tackle. And then Rambo Hunter, the name we like to talk about on this show, also still kind of linked to Georgia, still really heavily likes Georgia and being recruited by Georgia. Those are maybe some of the reasons why Georgia wasn't lighting up Rashad Chaney's phone lines and text lines as much as maybe he found that he was getting from Alabama here very recently. So that's a lot of defensive tackle bodies that are much larger than Rashad Chaney, and it just looks like Georgia was definitely shopping for a different type of athlete for defensive tackle.
Yeah, a little bit of an unusual response too from the people who do what you do for a living. For the Alabama fans' perspective, the online chatter on this one's been a little bit weird coming out of Tuscaloosa too. So we'll have to see how this one plays itself out. Let me move on to a different subject, and that's Zion Puckett, the wide receiver. You got some interesting quotes from him at DawgNation this week, and one of the things that he talked about was the growing relationship that he's developing with the brand new wide receivers coach at Georgia, Cortez Hankton. And I've told Seth this before. You know, Hankton was a guy that I didn't know very much about before he became a coach at Georgia. He's obviously been impressive in the limited window I've been able to see him in action here and hear some things, be said about him. What are you hearing from guys like Puckett about Hankton? What is it that's sticking out to them? I mean, obviously, Dan Lanning sort of, jumped in as a new coach at Georgia, and he absolutely, fits the mold of everybody else that Georgia seems to have. Hankton's someone that I know a little bit less about. So what are guys like Puckett really saying about Hankton at the moment here?
Well, Hankton is a guy that a lot of people haven't met face-to-face yet, but he's doing the recruiting laps by the text messages and the phone calls. Dominic Blaylock likes him. Jaden Hazelwood likes him. Zion Puckett also, they kind of all describe him as a very professional guy, and he's very measured in his words. He's very passionate. But the other things that come across with him is that he kind of checks a lot of boxes in terms of having played in the league and then been an assistant coach in the SEC, but also at Vanderbilt. So he knows about the technical aspects of the position, that he's coached up maybe some of Vanderbilt's receivers to find their edge. And when you get that sort of teaching and philosophies, and you put it on maybe definitely a higher level athlete, which is the one playing the position of the University of Georgia, that's going to translate into some big plays, into some big games for guys. But, Hankton definitely impresses a lot of folks, especially with that NFL on his resume. And he's also a very, very young dude, too, that can still relate to these players.
Yeah, let me move on to another subject that was somewhat, I guess, surprising for me this week, and that's the quarterback Ryan Hilinski, who chose South Carolina. And the honest truth here, Jeff, is I don't know enough about Hilinski to know if that's a guy that I really wanted Georgia to have or not. I certainly grew to be impressed with him based on some of the reporting that you had done. I'm more interested in the process here of, we had Hale McGranahan on the show for a minute yesterday who said that the timeline got accelerated pretty fast here when it comes to Hilinski. I mean, how weird was it for you that he chooses South Carolina before he takes what was a scheduled visit to Georgia here in a couple of weeks? Was this Muschamp knowing that needed to get the commitment before the visit took place? Or, what changed here to make Hilinski, the quarterback, not want to visit Georgia for G-Day?
Well, it's interesting. First of all, Ryan Hilinski is a fantastic quarterback. I think, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, that I think he will be one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the nation for 2019 when all is said and done.
Wow.
Just look at all those schools he's faced in California. I believe he faced his final 7 games in high school last year. He faced 6 teams that were rated among the top 150 prospects in the 150 teams in the nation. So he's definitely battle-tested, and he's battle-tested and threw completed balls at a 72% rate against those power programs as well. 6'4", about 225, and I thought it was going to come down to maybe Georgia, Ole Miss, and South Carolina, and it seems like Ryan had another tremendous visit to South Carolina. And some insidery stuff that kind of happened here is there were 2 quarterbacks that South Carolina was really looking at, and they both visited last weekend for their spring game. Brandon, I'll allow you the chance to insert a snickery comment here about the 25,000 fans that South Carolina had for their spring game.
Yep. Yeah, it was not a beautiful showing on TV. I will say that.
The evil Brandon laugh can come out, and then we can make our show session complete.
Right.
But we both those guys were interested in South Carolina. But here's what happened: about a day after that visit, the other gentleman commits to Mississippi State. Now, if you follow recruiting the way most of us in the industry do, when you see 2 guys that were probably expected to maybe go there or maybe eventually commit there, and one makes a commitment elsewhere, that kind of tells you that something was imminent. And for Ryan Hilinski, he just decided that South Carolina was the place. If we're being honest, he's definitely going to play faster behind Jake Bentley than he will behind Jake Fromm and Justin Fields. And this is a very purposeful kid. We've written about the tragic loss of his older brother back in January to suicide. And this past weekend was a time where the Hilinski family returned to a very special place in their family. It's where they laid their grandmother's ashes, spread their grandmother's ashes across the water many years ago. It was Ryan's favorite place in the world. It was Tyler, his late brother's favorite place in the world. And I think when they spread those ashes around that favorite place, I just think Ryan just decided he knew where he wanted to go, and he saw no need to continue the recruiting even further. Because he has been to all these schools already, and he was planning a second unofficial to Georgia for G-Day, even knowing that he still had officials in the bag to spend as well. He just decided it was his time. And I'm going to tell you, this is a very good player for South Carolina. They got substantially better with their quarterback depth chart of the future by adding Ryan Hilinski. I kind of think positively about the Gamecocks recruiting here, much in the same vein that I did when they landed Jamias Williams for that program. So that's a good thing for South Carolina, but you have to couch it with maybe the DawgNation side of this by thinking that Ryan Hilinski is a very good quarterback, probably going to have some great days in the SEC, but he is going to be chased a lot by Brenton Cox, Adam Anderson, and Nolan Smith in the days to come in that SEC East rivalry.
Well, and it is a rivalry when it plays out. Obviously, I'll be on the Georgia side for it, but you brought up a good point. The Hilinski family has been through so much, so I hope that young man is happy with the choice that he's made. I hope he finds himself a great college home, because that is a family that could certainly, enjoy rallying around some good news here, so I wish him well, at least in that regard. Speaking of quarterbacks, you actually did this week one of my favorite things. I love it when we get sort of like uncensored opinions from recruits who get a chance to watch practice, because it's so much less filtered than the other stuff we get from, coaches from time to time and brief windows the media gets to see. And Graham Mertz, he's a Wisconsin commit, I believe, and you had some quotes from him about what he'd seen from Fields and Fromm during Georgia practice. He had a chance to observe the practice. And on Fromm in particular, I love the description that Mertz gave of Fromm's leadership. Getting in the basically the face mask of other players and saying, you got to catch that football. And, we actually talked a lot about Fromm before you joined us here today, and just the year older, more mature, more experienced. And it sounds like, according to what the quarterback recruit that you got the quotes from, that Fromm is really growing into a true leader right here. Maybe he had some natural leadership tendencies a year ago, but an honest-to-goodness leader right now. Was that kind of your read on those quotes from Graham Mertz as well?
Yeah, I think, Brendan, there's a culture in any workplace setting or in any competitive environment. When you put out as much effort into succeeding and towards that bottom line as when you put out that much effort that Jake Fromm does, well, then naturally you're going to draw respect, and you're going to have a leadership stake in that process if you want to take it. And I really think that Jake has earned that right. Everybody is definitely very proud of what he does. They see how hard he works, and they see how much he cares about Georgia. So I really think that he's earned the right to kind of take those roles. And the other thing, I guess folks are going to have to get used to this, but they're going to have to start framing up Georgia's quarterback depth chart as thinking, these are two of the top 10 quarterbacks in the SEC, and they're on the same roster. Both of them are really going to look good in a practice setting, especially Fields once he gets past that freshman wall, once he gets used to going to class, working out, meeting, film sessions, and everything else like that. Then you're going to see Justin's going to keep getting better and better, much like Jake Fromm is going to keep getting better and better.
All right, we'll let you go on this one question, Jeff. We certainly appreciate your time here on this busy Friday on DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza. How many times over the course of the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months, are we going to be talking about Zachary Evans here, the 2020 running back? That feels like a name that may start popping up on this show a good bit more in the future.
Brandon, that is the new one for you, for your salivation station. That is the new one, man. You need to. I mean, if we talk about Zachary Evans too much too early, you're going to be slobbering all over that microphone, and it might rust out, Brandon.
So true.
That's what we got to work on. We've got to let you know about Zachary Evans, who runs a 3.91 short shuttle. I know, Brandon, how you feel about five-star running backs in Georgia with first letters of their names that begin with Z. You would like to see that tradition. You would like to see that tradition continue, and that dude is a dude.
Yeah, I'm excited about talking about him a whole lot more. Jeff, thanks for your time today. I know you got a lot going on here this week, so we appreciate you making some time for us. We will look forward to speaking to you very soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Enjoy yourself a little golf tournament this weekend. My guess is you probably got some picks in and some opportunity to kick back and relax and enjoy that. So we will chat here again soon.
Hey, two quick things, everybody. May everyone have a better day than Sergio Garcia did yesterday on number 15. Yes. And the second thing is go to DawgNation.com today. I hardly ever do this, but there's a story we wrote about Harry Miller.
Okay.
I'm going to just say, do yourselves a favor, do that young man's story a favor, and take the time to read about Harry Miller.
That's a must-read for us, Jeff. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you.
Thanks.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, Jeff references Sergio Garcia, last year's Masters champion. What did he call it, a 13 yesterday? Ooh, that is rough. You also heard Jeff taking a little bit of a pot shot there at the end. He and our buddy Hannah, who they team up for Before the Hedges on Monday night, they've been giving me a hard time. Now, if you're listening to the show, this is going to sound terrible, but for the people who watch it, so that they make fun of me because the microphone, I just showed it to the people watching us on video, is like all like rusted over now. It's like Hannah even like tweeted I think she tweeted a picture of this the other day of just how bad this microphone looks. See, DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza is a very blue collar show. The rest of these shows have all these like really nice microphones and things like that. We're like plowing ahead with like Spartan equipment, just the basics. And I do have a tendency to be a bit of a spitter, so I do have a lot of this stuff that ends up just sort of forming as residue on the microphone before it's all said and done. So yeah, that is. You probably don't want to be sitting too close to me during any one of our broadcasts. My buddy Mike Johnson, SEC Country Live, there's no telling how much I've spit on him over the course of the years doing the show, just because when the lips get a flapping, there's a lot of debris that ends up flying, but that's probably more than y'all want to know. Let me instead shift gears here and do our SEC through. Quick reminder here, by the way, coming up on April the 17th, a lot of you have been asking, hey, what are y'all doing for G-Day? What are y'all doing for G-Day? Well, we don't have all the plans in place yet because we're sort of last-minute planners, but one thing I can tell you is we're going to have a great Marlowe's broadcast. It's been a while since we've been to Marlowe's for a show, but we're going to be there on Tuesday, April 17th. There's actually a lot of fun and surprises in store for this one. I'm going to have to tell you more about it as we kind of get a little bit closer, but as they say, sort of save the date here. Brookhaven location of Marlowe's for Tuesday, April 17th. That's the week before G-Day. It's going to be like our spring game preview there for the Dogs. So I'm really excited about being Tuesday, April 17th, Marlowe's in Brookhaven for a very special spring game preview with our friends there at Marlowe's. All right, a couple SEC stories to get to here. Alabama gets a quarterback commitment here this week. It comes on Thursday from Paul Tyson. Some of you may know who Tyson is. Some of you may not. He is the great-grandson of Bear Bryant. Now, admittedly, this is a bit of a cool story, right? I mean, admittedly, Paul Bryant, Bear Bryant's grandson, playing quarterback for Alabama. You can't deny there's some real theater there. But I will also be glad to admit something to you. I am sick and tired of Alabama. I just am. I'm ready for this, magical ride that Saban and that crew's been over. I'm ready for that to be over. The last thing I want, and y'all know I don't even pretend to be objective, the last thing that I want is Paul Tyson, Bear Bryant's grandson, to go to Alabama, become the next great quarterback. Can you imagine how insufferable these CBS broadcasts are going to be, and these SEC Network, documentaries are going to be about the legacy of Bear Bryant being played at Alabama again with Paul Tyson as quarterback? That is not something I want any part of. Spring games are on the SEC tomorrow. There are actually a few of these. I think we have a graphic that we can show you of the spring games. You've got Arkansas and Ole Miss both at 2 p.m. on Saturday. You've got the Auburn game coming up at 4 p.m. These are all Eastern time for Saturday. And the piece of news coming out of the Auburn spring game is the fact that Jarrett Stidham, the Auburn quarterback, not going to play. And this is not a surprise. I think I even predicted this on SEC Country Live yesterday that he would likely sit out. Or maybe I said this on DawgNation Daily. I don't remember. But I'm not surprised that Stidham's not going to play. He really hasn't practiced a ton this spring. He's recovering from shoulder surgery. I think he's going to be fine for the fall, but they're going to hold him out of the spring game. Then you get to the Arkansas-Ole Miss game, the Arkansas-Ole Miss spring games. I don't really have much of any reason to watch the Arkansas game. I might check in on the Ole Miss deal for a little bit here just to see Matt Corral. I think it's going to be kind of fun to watch him if he's, a little bit more polished, a little bit more put together than any of the other Florida quarterbacks. Obviously, Corral was a one-time Gators commit. I think that Dan Mullen mishandled that situation. I don't mind telling you that. So I'm a little bit curious about that, but you do have 3 SEC spring games for tomorrow. And then the final story to get to here for our SEC through. I thought this was really interesting, and I don't know if we talked about this on DawgNation Daily yesterday or not, but we did a lot of this on SEC Country Live yesterday afternoon. That I mentioned the ESPN FPI data off the top of the show and kind of what chances it gave Georgia of winning all of its SEC East games. And Georgia's, according to FBI data anyway, a fairly sizable favorite in virtually every single game this year, and a big favorite in all of its SEC East games. But in terms of the overall conference championship odds, right now Georgia has the best chance of anybody of winning the SEC. They're like, and I accidentally closed the browser window that had these exact percentages. I'm going to have to sort of freestyle these. But Georgia was given more than a 40% chance of winning the SEC according to the ESPN FPI data. Alabama below that at 37%. Now Alabama did rank ahead of Georgia on the overall sort of national rankings. Bama was 2, Georgia was 3, but Georgia a slightly better chance of winning the SEC. Most people are going to assume this is because of the fact that Georgia plays in the East, Alabama plays in the West. That's probably true, but it is also worth pointing out here that Alabama's 2 toughest Western Division opponents, Georgia also plays this upcoming season. LSU and Auburn, so the division's not that skewed in favor of Georgia when you look at the overall total schedule. Then after that, you get to Auburn with like an 11% chance of winning the SEC according to the ESPN FPI data, and then after that, there's a huge drop off. The next most likely SEC champion, I believe, is Florida at like 3.4%. And I said this on the program yesterday. I mean, how far has Florida fallen as a program? They should never have just a 3% chance of winning the SEC. That's a pretty big disaster. You get like a Tennessee who has got like a 0% chance, less than a 1% chance, I believe, for LSU. So it is really a have and have not type scenario in the SEC right now. Georgia and Alabama far ahead of everybody else. Huge gap between those two programs and Auburn. And then almost a bigger gap between Auburn and the rest of the SEC, even than Auburn has trying to climb up to get to Alabama and Georgia. So a really interesting pecking order here where there are two teams that seem to be in that sort of elite category, one team that seems to be solidly good, probably top 10 maybe in Auburn's case, and a whole lot of other teams that seem to be fighting for the scraps left on the table there. So kind of an interesting scenario according to the ESPN FPI data, and we will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, we'll do our Kroger click list checklist in just a moment. Before that, let me also kind of go back to what we were saying about the Georgia scheduling earlier when it comes to the ESPN FPI data. I gave you the numbers for Georgia and the SEC East, and I was surprised to see that according to the ESPN FPI data, by the way, which as I said before was wrong about Georgia a season ago. It made Georgia an underdog in games that end up being a blowout winner. But according to the FPI data, at Missouri, Georgia's toughest division game for this upcoming season. Georgia's got less of a chance of winning that. Still 78.3 chance to win, but less of a chance of winning that than it does Florida, South Carolina. And the South Carolina one there is going to be the real surprise. That's who I think most people would think of as, and we had a great conversation during our video portion of the show yesterday, great conversation about that South Carolina game, but the ESPN FBI data sees a slightly different thing. It is worth pointing out that both the Auburn game, though, and the LSU game, Georgia's two SEC West opponents for 2018, those are the two toughest games that Georgia plays this season. All right, let's do our Kroger click list checklist for a moment. Busy weekend for Georgia athletics, both in terms of the current student athletes and the former student athletes. Let me start with this. Diamond Dogs continue their series at Vanderbilt both today and play again on Saturday. This has really been a pretty interesting little run here for the Diamond Dogs. They are red hot. Won last night at Vanderbilt, a place that's not easy to win. And pretty testy here. Vanderbilt, I guess, was doing some things that the Georgia guys sort of thought was showing them up a bit. There was some heated words between coaches at the end of this game. So another sort of interesting wrinkle here is the fact that Georgia's playing well, but maybe a little bad blood between these two opponents the rest of the way. Softball back in Athens. They'll host Missouri here this weekend. That's a series that starts on Saturday. Gym Dogs in Tuscaloosa for the NCAA Regional. Good luck to the gymnastics team there. And then you've got 4 former Georgia golfers all competing in the Masters here, what we hope is this weekend. Certainly one more day today. Go back to the Thursday scores. Kevin Kisner was even. Bubba Watson, Brian Harmon, Russell Henley all +1 on the day, so good luck to them as they try to make a run there at Augusta National. Of course, Bubba Watson, a 2-time winner at the Masters. That's all your Kroger click list checklist. Y'all know I think that the Kroger click list is a super convenient way to buy groceries. We love having Kroger a part of DawgNation Daily here. And by the way, quick reminder from Kroger to come out and join your local Kroger chef for a guided kids cooking experience, including apron and patch. You also get a chef's hat, recipe card, and a box and juicer. It's all for just $7. And in April, the Kroger Chef Jr. is going to be featured a spring fling salad. You can do it April 14th or April 21st. The website to go to is KrogerChefJr.com. And if you're watching, you see the website. For those of you who are listening, I'll tell you the word junior spelled out, Junior. KrogerChefJr.com. You can find the closest Kroger store, and you can reserve your spot for the guided kids cooking experience. And it's great to have the Kroger click list checklist every Friday here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And as we get ready to wrap up our show, and I guess actually wrapping up the week here too, I mentioned Florida a moment ago, and obviously that brings to mind our Gatorade countdown. We do it every day here on the program, and 204 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville for the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. We think the Dogs get another win, and we think it's going to be a rough year for the Gators, and we'll be enjoying every minute of that, including 204 days from right now. Gatorade countdown here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Also, Jeff gave you a little bit of a plug for a piece up at DawgNation.com that I hope you will go read. I also saw something else interesting at DawgNation.com yesterday. Kind of an interesting note from Seth Emerson about the Georgia offensive line. A little bit of shuffling of some pieces there during spring practice. Sounds like Solomon Kinley getting a little bit of work at left guard. I find that interesting. The other thing that Seth drops in, apparently Trey Hill, the freshman, impressing right now one of those guard competitions. That's something to think about. We'll see you Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And for those of you with us on video right now, we'll look forward to having some questions and comments from some of y'all, both on YouTube and Facebook, and hope you're getting ready for a great weekend. It's going to take me a second to pull some of these up, so I'll kind of fumble around here and kind of get that going here. On Facebook, I should say YouTube here for a moment, Jacob Mahaffey says, love that Florida has little to no chance of winning the SEC. Music to Gator haters' ears. Jacob, you're 1,000% right about that. I certainly appreciate that. Dapper Dan says, wish James Cook was here for spring. He would have benefited more than any early enrollee as far as getting on the field sooner and more often. Yeah, that's true. Obviously you do like those early enrollees. I mentioned that before, how much I like those. I thought it was interesting what Jeff said when he was on the show on Tuesday for our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All, that Cook has apparently just been blazing in these track meets, these state track meets down there in Florida. Not quite as fast as Tyson Campbell, but pretty daggum fast, all things being equal. So it sounds like he's at least making good of his time. And I saw this thing on Twitter one time about how if you look at I'm going to get the numbers wrong about this, and this may not even be true, but it was at least interesting, that if you look at like the 4- and 5-star guys that sort of pan out and play well compared to sometimes the ones that don't, one of the things that you see for the successful 4- and 5-star guys a lot is a connection to track. That the football players that are not playing track, sometimes you're going to wonder, what are they doing during that time of year? And so, yeah, Cook's not an early enrollee, but training and getting ready for a pretty competitive track season down there in the state of Florida. Anthony Schwartz, some of those guys also running down there. I would say it's probably still pretty good use of his time. Brian Kephart says that Florida season is going to go much the same way Sergio's hole on the Masters did yesterday, shooting 13. There was also, and I don't want to turn this into a golf show, but there was also that weird deal with Rich Lerner from the Golf Channel, who sort of made a joke about the fact that Sergio and his wife are naming their child Azalea, and whatever the name of the hole was, each of the holes there at Augusta have individual names based on some of the flora and fauna around that particular hole. Rich Lerner made a joke about what they might name their second child, and Sergio's wife got upset about that, and now it's this whole big Twitter thing. So the Masters from a drama standpoint is not disappointing thus far. And it would be great to see some of these UGA guys make the cut here, depending on how things go on Friday. Let me hop over on Facebook, get a few Facebook comments here. Will Scott says, with Helinski going to South Carolina, it makes them our biggest threat for the next few years. By committing early, he's going to help build a good class. Yeah, he could. We were watching a lot of his film here earlier. Y'all are, I'm assuming, on video now, so you probably saw some of that. And I don't know. I mean, a lot of those receivers he were throwing to were pretty wide open. Some of that looked like 7-on-7 football. But, yeah, my guess is that he probably helps them build a pretty good class. That's probably fair to say. Max McDonald says, got to ask, if we don't get a quarterback this year, do we throw all our eggs into the Harrison Bailey basket for next year? What's the next quarterback option? I mean, I think that Bailey is a really good option. That's one of the names I'm certainly hopeful for. I've told y'all this before. Max Johnson, who looks like a really good prospect for 2020, I have no enthusiasm about him whatsoever. My assumption is he either goes to Florida State or goes to Miami. I can't see him ending up at Georgia. And then you got the 2021 kid from Buford, I believe. That's the other name that you start thinking about here. So I guess I'm more interested in 2020 and 2021 when it comes to quarterbacks than I am 2019, although I do want to see Georgia sign some quarterback this season. Robert Barnes, to kind of go back to some of the Jake Fromm audio we played earlier, said all the dogs when interviewed seem very focused on the team, love it, and they don't fall for the what about last year or last game questions. Yeah, I mean, first of all, Georgia's going to pick the guys to speak to the media who kind of have the perspective that they want to share, the guys that are really good at articulating that, and I guess they have a right, to do that. It is, their entity. They want to control the message on that somewhat, but certainly for Jake Fromm, I mean, you hear a guy that's mean, he's got that polish now. I mean, I told y'all, I like Fromm a lot, and he's really got that polish. Will Puckett says, it's not outlandish. This is on Facebook. He says it's not outlandish to think that we'll go undefeated in the regular season. Bama has a good chance at doing the same. We both play Auburn and LSU. An undefeated SEC championship would take place. Does the loser make the playoff, or do the weak schedules leave one of us out with the loss? It's a great question, and there's nothing about a question like that can't be kicked around during the off season here. I never thought they would put 2 SEC teams in the playoff a year ago. I just didn't. I thought that even with the inferior resume, Ohio State would be picked over Georgia or I should say Alabama, because I just thought that the playoff committee liked the idea of getting that cross section of the country. When you put Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia in the playoff, sorry, my nose itches. You put 3 teams from really essentially like within driving distance of each other, a couple hours apart. You put them in the playoff. You really only, this becomes sort of a deep South playoff at that point in time. I just didn't think that would be the committee would be all that keen to do that. So they did, and so now it makes me wonder: was there really any kind of like track record that you can sort of lean on? It becomes hard to make predictions about how the committee is going to behave, because I thought they behaved in 2017 in a way that was different than I would have expected them to do. Putting in the loser of a conference championship game in the playoff, whether it be Alabama or Georgia, even with strong undefeated type regular season, I think that may be just still a bridge too far for this committee, but I was wrong about last year, and it's worth pointing out that I was. Jerry Lewis says, I think that Fromm going to be a monster this year. He's already driven, but Fields is going to push him that much harder. That's well said. Fromm is sort of intrinsically driven, but he's also getting the external motivation that comes from having to be better than Fields. That's a great point. Alan Verbanchik says that Fromm's going to remain the starter all year. That would be my prediction as well. Stephen Ogburn says if Alabama loses, it'll get in. If Georgia loses, it will not. Yeah, obviously there's a longer track record there, and there's maybe the thought of the benefit of the doubt. Ohio State's gotten it before. Some would say Alabama's gotten it before. The suggestion that the media doesn't quite, or the committee influenced by the media doesn't quite have that same viewpoint of Georgia as of yet. I wonder how much that changes over the course of this year, though, if Georgia's out there just tearing folks up. Terrence Eberhard on Facebook says, I really think Saban made a move with Rashad Chaney just to see if he could lure Hazelwood away. Saban is in panic mode right now when it comes to recruiting. He's pulling out all the gimmicks. I wouldn't put it past Saban to have done the Chaney thing because of that. I also wonder, and listen, this is not my story. I don't want to get too deep into it because I don't know what I'm talking about here, but I mentioned this to Jeff. You had sort of a weird response from the Alabama media. They didn't just like rush out to report this. This is not one of those things that you saw a lot of, heavy reporting on right away. You hope that the line of communication here between Alabama and Chaney is what it's supposed to be, and you hope there wasn't some sort of miscommunication there. That that's I guess as comfortable as I feel about saying that, because I was very surprised to see him committing to Alabama right now. Matt Tomlin said, is Owen Popo leaning towards Auburn after a recent visit with Wanya Morris? Obviously we're coming up on May 5th, which is that decision day, and yes, Auburn is certainly trying to put its, best foot forward when it comes to Popo, and I think you're seeing with right now a lot of these Grayson teammates, some of the same stuff you saw with Adam Anderson a year ago. Remember when LSU essentially just offered the entire defensive line from Rome and ended up getting commits from all 3, Jaquan Griffin and Jamarcus Chapman and then Adam Anderson. And none of the 3 ended up actually going to LSU, and it always seemed weird that LSU was in on recruits that a lot of the other SEC just kind of was not in on. You almost wonder if the same thing's kind of going on here with Popo and some of these other SEC schools. I want to say you mentioned Wanya Morris going with Popo to Auburn. Didn't LSU also recently host Popo, Morris, and Ronald Tompkins, the running back, trying to get to Popo through his teammates here? If I had to make my crystal ball prediction, and I don't make the predictions for a reason, I leave that to the pros, but if I had to make my crystal ball prediction, I'm still predicting it to be Georgia, although Benjamin Wolk, who's an Auburn reporter for us at SEC Country and a frequent guest here on DawgNation Daily, has certainly said that Auburn's trying to put on that full-court press. Miriam Martin Corbin says that, Alabama, would maybe not typically offer a defensive lineman of Rashad Cheney's size unless they were trying to go after Jaden Hazelwood. I don't want to pick and prod over Cheney too much because we try to treat these recruits with a lot of respect because we all we hope they all go on to have great careers even if they don't go to Georgia. But this whole story is just a little odd to me. It's either odd on the Alabama end or odd on the Cheney end, and I'm not quite sure which is which here. But this is a little bit of an unusual story that there's probably going to be another layer to added here at some point in time. Will Puckett on Facebook says, "Hey BA, you don't think I go back to the idea of me spitting in my microphone. He says, you don't think Munson spitting his mic every now and then just out of excitement, it's enthusiasm. Keep it up. Well, I appreciate that, and I'd like to think I was in that kind of good company. I don't know if I am, but I'd like to think that I was." Melinda Moa, as far as like the guys taking visits, said, "I'd take my visits too, free vacays." Yeah. I'm right there with you on that. You get those 5 official visits, and you get treated nicely on those deals. Y'all know if I was a good enough player, there wouldn't even be a doubt where I was going. However, my 5 official visits, I'd probably pick 5 really nice places and go let them entertain me. Randy Hall reminding us that Cinco de Papo coming up on May 5th, and that's right. It's a big day for UGA recruiting. Let me hop back over here to YouTube for a moment. Jacob Mahaffey saying, "I think that Brenton Cox and Mark Webb are going to step up on defense." I would agree on both fronts. I tell you, it's hard for me to find a freshman that I'm more anticipating than Brenton Cox's debut. I just think he has a chance to be fantastic. Really fantastic. Dapper Dan also says something I completely agree with, that it's hard to show out on defense during a scrimmage. Might be a pick or two, but that comes from second, third string offense. I wonder, for some of these sort of like closed door scrimmages, the ones away from the media, are they going to hit a little bit more and be a little bit more physical? Obviously for G-Day and the other spring games around the SEC, I'm almost solely interested in offense on those because the defense just doesn't get a chance to do much. Now, as Mike Johnson pointed out on SEC Country Live yesterday, there's sort of another side of that coin of he thinks that offensive linemen end up getting dinged too much for spring game performances because any kind of clear path to the quarterback ends up being ruled a sack when in obviously real football, quarterbacks can sort of shake free, make guys miss, and that part's sort of taken out of the spring game. If an outside linebacker is making a beeline towards Fromm or Fields, they're going to blow the whistle and call that a sack. And real football, especially in Fields' case, that kind of stuff is not going to be a sack more often than not, but the offensive lineman ends up being sort of demerited there when, Mike, of course, is the biggest offensive line homer in the world, but he says, the offensive line ends up getting criticism it doesn't deserve. Hard Times 57 on YouTube asks about plans for G-Day. So I can start telling you something about G-Day week. As I mentioned before, if you're in the Atlanta area, April 17th, that's Tuesday, April 17th, a huge night for us. A lot of fun and surprises to be announced on this, but huge night for us at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. Marlowe's in Brookhaven for a very special preview of the big spring game coming up. So would love to have you be a part of that, and that's going to really lead into a full week of G-Day stuff for us. That's going to be really fun. Really fun. New Level Recruiting says Adam Anderson's going to be better than Brenton Cox. So if you're making a long-range projection, I don't know if I'm going to take a bet on either one of those two sides because I think they're both really good-looking prospects. But to me, and this is just my sort of knee-jerk reaction, Brenton Cox looks like he's ready to play. He just looks like he is ready to go. And obviously, over the course of the long haul, I'm excited about both those guys. But that's a great opinion, strong opinion. Love that kind of stuff. Christopher Rule says that he's loving Cinco de Papo. It's the day after his birthday, after the Star Wars Day, which is May the 4th. May the 4th be with you, which is the kind of corny joke that probably works on me more than it should. But yeah, happy upcoming birthday and looking forward to Cinco de Papo. Shelton Tucker says the only way that Fields won't take over the quarterback job if he's redshirted. Boy, I think it's possible to give credit to both guys without discrediting the other. I'm going to give Fromm a lot of credit as a starter that's very hard to unsee, and I don't say that in any way to assume that Justin Fields is any less than as advertised. But when you've got a strong returning starter who's only getting better, beating him out for the starting job just hard. Just hard. Will says he's going to get himself a blind squirrel. Yeah, I'd love nothing more for this to produce some of these little stuffed animals. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Shelton Tucker says, I'm for either quarterback. I like both. And that's what I hope that Georgia fans can keep doing, is sort of having that idea that there is no Team Fromm and Team Fields. There's Georgia, and these are the two quarterbacks that Georgia has. And listen, I mean, I'm just like y'all are. I get sucked into the drama of who's going to do what just as much as anybody does. But we can enjoy the drama. We can enjoy the intrigue. We can be wowed by both these guys' athleticism without letting it turn into a sort of division of some guys want Fromm, some guys want Fields. You can have a competition, in other words, that doesn't veer into the direction of being controversy, and I hope that's what goes on here. Sorry we missed out some of the comments. We'll try to catch some more on Monday. I do hope you all get ready to have a great weekend upcoming. Enjoy it wherever you are. Hopefully the weather's good and you can kind of get outside and have a little fun here. And then we'll see you back again on Monday for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live presented by Marco's Pizza. We'll talk to you then.